You're not on the guest list, Mom. Giselle's family will be handling everything from here. The venue deposit has already cleared, so thank you for that. That was the voicemail my son left me at 7:14 on a Tuesday morning. Not a call, not a conversation, a voicemail. 43 seconds. I had to play it 3 times before my brain accepted what my ears had heard. I was still in my housecoat, standing at the kitchen counter, waiting for my coffee to finish. The same kitchen where I had taught him to scramble eggs. The same counter where he used to sit on the edge, legs dangling, telling me about his day at school. I stood there, holding the phone against my chest long after the recording ended, as if maybe the warmth of my own body could make it mean something different. You're not on the guest list. My son was getting married in 6 weeks. I had paid for the venue. Let me back up, because this didn't come from nowhere. These things never do. They arrive at your door, disguised as small inconveniences, until one morning you realize you haven't been inside your own family for a very long time. His name is Damon. He's 34 years old. I raised him by myself after his father passed when Damon was 11. A heart attack, sudden and without warning, the kind that leaves no room for goodbyes. After that, it was just the 2 of us in our little house in Savannah, Georgia. I worked 2 jobs for 3 years straight. Receptionist by day, alterations at a dry cleaner's 3 evenings a week. I did not complain. I did not explain. I simply did what needed doing, because he needed stability, and I was the only one left to give it. He grew into a good man. I believed that for a long time. He met Giselle 2 years ago at a conference in Atlanta. She is polished, I will say that. Sharp clothes, sharper opinions. The first time I met her, she shook my hand like she was greeting a vendor. Firm, quick, professional. I told myself that was just nerves. Some people take a while to warm up. I gave her the benefit of the doubt, the way mothers do, because we love our children, and so we extend that love to whoever they love, even when something in us whispers not to rush. By the second visit, she had already begun rearranging things. Not furniture, priorities. Damon stopped calling on Sundays. When I asked about it, he said she preferred evenings for phone calls and that Sundays were their time together. I said, of course, I understand. I switched to Tuesday mornings. That lasted for a while until those calls also grew shorter, then sporadic, then mostly voicemails I left that he'd return by text with a thumbs-up emoji and a sorry busy week. But the wedding, that was supposed to be different. He called me last spring, actually called me, not a text, a real phone call, to tell me they'd set a date, October, an outdoor ceremony at a historic estate outside Charleston. Beautiful, he said. You'll love it, Mom. I was so glad to hear his voice, so grateful just to be included in the announcement, that I didn't stop to notice he never said you're invited. I just assumed. Because what mother wouldn't? 3 days later, he sent me a spreadsheet. Itemized: venue rental, catering deposit, floral arrangements, rehearsal dinner, a total at the bottom highlighted in yellow. $34,200. Beneath it, one line: Dad's side of the family would have wanted to contribute. Since it's just you, we were hoping you could cover the deposit to hold our date. We'll sort the rest as we go. I read it 4 times. I thought about calling him, but then I thought, this is my son's wedding. This is the moment I pictured since before he could walk. So I called the estate. I wired the deposit, $14,000. Money I had set aside over 8 years in a separate savings account. I started the year he graduated college. I called it the Joy Fund, for the occasions that mattered, and I told myself this was exactly what it was for. I ordered a mother-of-the-groom dress 3 days after that. Dusty rose, tea-length, with a small pearl button at each wrist. I brought it home and hung it on the back of my bedroom door so I could see it every morning. For 6 months, I heard almost nothing. I told myself they were busy with planning. I sent texts asking if I could help with anything. Could I address envelopes? I have neat handwriting, always have. Could I help choose the rehearsal dinner menu? I know Damon is allergic to shellfish. Maybe Giselle's family didn't know. Did they need help coordinating the out-of-town guests? I knew several people driving up from Savannah who would need hotel recommendations. Every text received the same reply. We've got it covered, but thank you. I stopped asking. I told myself no news was good news. Then, on a Tuesday morning in August, 6 weeks before the wedding, I was standing in my kitchen in my housecoat and my phone rang. I smiled when I saw his name. I let it ring twice, the way you do when you want to compose yourself. When you want to answer, sounding calm and easy and not like someone who has been waiting. But it didn't ring. It went to voicemail. He had called and immediately let it drop to voicemail, intentionally, the way you do when you have something to say that you don't want to actually say out loud. You're not on the guest list, Mom. Giselle's family will be handling everything from here. The venue deposit has already cleared. So thank you for that. So thank you for that. I stood in the kitchen until the coffee finished brewing. Then I poured a cup I didn't drink. I walked to the bedroom and stood in front of that dusty rose dress for a long moment. Then I went to my desk and opened my laptop. I pulled up the account I had used to wire the deposit. The estate had a contact listed on their website, a coordinator named Ms. Holloway. I had spoken to her twice before, once when I called to confirm the wire had arrived, once when she called to thank me and ask if I had any dietary restrictions for the rehearsal dinner. I found her email. I composed a message. I did not write it in anger. I wrote it in the same even tone I used when I wrote to my insurance company, or my congressman, or anyone else who needed to understand that I was a woman of clarity and intention. I explained that I was the account holder who had issued the deposit. I explained that I was, as of that morning, no longer an invited guest at the event, having been informed via voicemail by my son. I asked, very politely, whether the deposit was refundable under any circumstances, and, if not, whether it was transferable to another event date or a different name entirely. Miss Holloway replied within the hour. She was sympathetic in that professional way that good coordinators are, warm without overstepping. She confirmed the deposit was non-refundable under standard terms, but that as the sole named account holder, I did have the right to transfer the booking to a new event under my own name within the same calendar year at no additional charge. I read that line twice. Under my own name, I thought about that dress hanging on my door. I thought about the 8 years of that joy fund. I thought about a Tuesday morning voicemail and a spreadsheet with a yellow highlighted total and a son who had called and immediately let it drop so he wouldn't have to hear my voice when he delivered the news. I did not reply to Ms. Holloway right away. Instead, I opened a new document and I started writing names. My friend Octavia, who had retired from teaching the year before and kept saying she wanted to do something meaningful but didn't know what. My neighbor Celeste, a widow of 4 years who still set 2-place settings out of habit and never mentioned it except once quietly, like it embarrassed her. My cousin Harriet. Wait. I stopped. I looked down the list and crossed her name out. Started again. My friend Rosamond, who had worked 31 years as a school nurse and whose daughters, lived in different time zones, and called on holidays with background noise that made the conversation feel like an afterthought. My friend Wilda, who sang in the church choir and had the kind of laugh that started in her whole body before it ever reached her face. Pearl, who had cared for her mother through dementia for 6 years, and, when her mother finally passed, told me she didn't know what to do with mornings anymore. I wrote 7 names, 7 women who had been the backbone of everyone around them and had somehow still ended up eating dinner alone more nights than not. Then I went back to Ms. Holloway's email. I typed, "I'd like to transfer the booking. New event, a luncheon. Guest count, 8. I will confirm the menu and any additional costs by end of week." I pressed send before I could think too long about it. That night, Damon called. An actual call, this time. I let it ring to voicemail. He said, "Mom, I want to make sure we're okay. I know this wasn't what you expected, but Giselle's mom had a lot of opinions about the size, and we had to make some cuts. It wasn't personal, it's just logistics. Call me back when you get a chance." Logistics. $14,000. 8 years of a joy fund. 1 dusty rose dress with pearl buttons. And I was a logistics problem. I did not call back that night. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in the chair by the window that used to be my husband's chair, the one worn thin on the left armrest from where he always rested his elbow, and I just sat with it. Not the anger. I was past anger by then. Something quieter. The kind of feeling that settles in when you finally stop hoping something is a misunderstanding and accept that it is simply the truth. He knew what he was doing when he let that call go to voicemail. He knew. Over the following weeks, I said nothing. I did not post anything. I did not call his aunts to give my version first. When my neighbor asked how the wedding planning was coming, I smiled and said they were handling everything beautifully, which was technically true. Damon sent 2 more texts. The first asked if I had any questions about the voicemail. The second, arriving 10 days before the wedding, asked if the estate had confirmed the final headcount on my end. I reread that one several times. On my end. As if I were a vendor, as if I had a role in the logistics of my own exclusion. I replied to neither. What I was doing instead was planning something else entirely. I called Miss Holloway and confirmed. 8 women, a Saturday afternoon in late October, white tablecloths if possible, nothing formal, nothing stiff. She asked if there was an occasion. I thought about it for a moment, then said yes. "I'm celebrating the women in my life who never got celebrated enough." She said quietly that she loved that, and I believed her. I called each woman personally, not texts, calls, and I started each one the same way. "I have something I want to ask you, and I want you to say yes before your brain has a chance to talk you out of it." Octavia laughed and said, "You haven't changed in 50 years. Celeste cried a little and then apologized for crying. Rosamund said she'd have to check her calendar and then checked it immediately and said she was free. Wilda didn't say anything for a long moment, just breathed, and then said when, and I told her, and she said, "I'll be there," Pearl said, "and I will never forget this. Nobody has invited me anywhere in 4 years that wasn't a funeral." I said, "This is the opposite of that." The morning of the luncheon, I put on a different dress. Not the dusty rose. I had returned that one 2 weeks prior, quietly, no drama. The dress I wore instead was a deep burgundy I had bought for myself on a Tuesday afternoon, just because I walked past it in a window, and it looked like something a woman who was done apologizing for taking up space might wear. I stood in front of the mirror, and I thought, yes, that's it. We arrived to white tablecloths and small vases of pale yellow flowers, and a coordinator who greeted us at the door with a warmth that felt genuine. The estate was beautiful in October. The magnolias had gone, but the oaks had turned, and the afternoon light came through the tall windows in long, warm columns. We sat down together, 8 women, some of whom knew each other well, some who were meeting for the first time. All of us somewhere in the season of life where you've given most of what you had, and you're only just starting to ask what remains for you. Celeste brought a photo of her late husband tucked in her purse. She didn't make a thing of it. I only knew because she touched her purse once when someone mentioned loss, in that careful, instinctive way people do when they need to know something is still there. Wilda told a story about the time she led the choir at a funeral for a man nobody liked, and how hard it was not to let the truth creep into the hymns, and we laughed until Rosamond had to set down her water glass. Pearl told us about her mother. Not the hard parts, she'd carried those long enough. She told us about the Saturday mornings, how her mother loved game shows and always shouted the wrong answer, but was convinced she'd won something. How the last coherent thing her mother ever said to her was, "Your hands are warm." How Pearl had written it down that night so she wouldn't forget. She said she still had the piece of paper. Nobody told her she should be over it by now. Nobody changed the subject. We just sat with it, the way women do when they're not performing strength for an audience. At the end of the meal, I stood up. I hadn't planned a speech. I had just brought something I wanted to share. It was a small framed photograph of my son, taken when he was about 9 years old. He's standing in the backyard in a too big baseball cap, grinning the way children do when they're in the middle of becoming someone and they don't know it yet. I loved that boy completely. I still do. That is not a simple thing to hold. I set the photo on the table, not at the center, off to one side, quiet, the way a memory sits. And I said, I didn't stop loving him when he stopped seeing me. I don't think that kind of love goes anywhere. I just decided I wasn't going to wait for it to be returned before I let myself be happy. Octavia reached over and squeezed my hand. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. After lunch, we walked the grounds. The October air was cool and sharp in the best way, the kind that makes you feel awake, actually awake, present in your own body and your own life. We walked slowly. Pearl linked her arm through mine without asking, the way old friends do, though we'd only known each other 2 years. Celeste stopped beside an oak tree and just looked up into it for a long moment, not saying anything, just looking. Wilda started singing something low under her breath. I recognized it after a few bars, an old standard, the kind her grandmother must have sung. The rest of us didn't join in, but we slowed our steps to match it. I thought about that voicemail, the 43 seconds, so thank you for that. I turned it over in my mind the way you turn a stone in your hand, examining it, and then I set it down on the ground and kept walking. 3 days after the wedding. Damon's wedding, which I heard went beautifully, from someone who attended and didn't know I hadn't been invited. My son sent an email. He does that when he wants to control the shape of a conversation, put it in writing so it can be reread, edited, curated. His subject line was checking in. He wrote that the wedding had been everything they'd hoped for, that he and Giselle were very happy, that he hoped I wasn't too upset about the guest list situation, that it had been a difficult decision and they'd had to make a lot of hard calls. He wrote that he hoped we could move forward and find our footing as a family. He wrote, and this was the part I read last and slowest. The estate just contacted us about some kind of billing discrepancy. They're saying the deposit was transferred to a different event, and they need confirmation from the account holder to release our finalized documentation. Could you look into that and let us know what's going on? I read it once. Then I closed my laptop. I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of iced tea and stood at the window for a while, watching a pair of cardinals at the feeder my husband had built 30 years ago, red against the gray October sky. Still there. There was no discrepancy to clarify. The estate had done exactly what I asked. The deposit had gone exactly where I directed it. Nothing was lost. Nothing was missing. Everything I spent had been received. I thought about writing back. I composed several versions in my head over the course of that afternoon. Some were long, some were short. In one version, I explained everything clearly. In another, I was more formal, more factual. In every version, by the time I reached the end, I realized I was trying to make him understand something that he would only understand when he was ready, and no email I wrote would make him ready. So I wrote nothing. I didn't close the door. I left it the way you leave a light on for someone. Not demanding they come home, just making clear that if they do, the house will still be warm. But I was done subsidizing his comfort at the cost of my own, done making myself smaller so that he could feel larger, done funding the occasions I was not invited to attend. That evening, I took the dusty rose dress out of the back of my closet. I had not returned it after all. I had moved it out of sight, which is different, and I finally looked at it clearly. It was a beautiful dress. Someone should wear it to something lovely. I thought of Pearl. She and I are close to the same size. She had a niece getting married in the spring. I folded it carefully in tissue paper and set it aside to bring her. Then I sat down in my husband's chair, the one with the worn armrest, and I let the quiet settle in around me. Not the heavy kind of quiet that presses down on you. The other kind. The kind that comes when you've stopped waiting for something to be different and you've started building something true instead. I have lived 67 years. I have buried a husband and raised a son alone and held the hands of people I loved when they were too tired to hold their own. I have given more than I've kept, and for most of those years, I told myself that was what love required. But I was there that October afternoon. I was at that table with those women. I watched Celeste look up into an oak tree like she was remembering something she'd thought was lost. I heard Pearl say, "Nobody has invited me anywhere in 4 years that wasn't a funeral." I walked those grounds with Wilda humming something her grandmother used to sing, and I understood, finally, that love does not require you to disappear. It asks you to remain, for yourself first, and then, from that place, for everyone else who needs you to still be standing. I am still standing, and I have learned, at 67, what it took me far too long to know. The people worth giving everything to are the ones who would never ask you to give up your seat.